All right, everybody. Good morning. I hope everybody is doing well and recovered from Thanksgiving, Iron Bowl, and all good things in between. What an amazing couple of days. And I'm speaking of amazing. I'm so pleased that John Archibald has time for me today for us for a conversation. Good morning, John, and thank you for being here this morning.
Good morning, Bernard. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. Good to survive that Iron Bowl.
Oh my gosh, are we sure that the game is over? Uh,
I think it's all over. Uh,
Now, John, you were at Bama in '85 when Tiffin
I was.
kick in Legion Field, and I happened to be in that stadium that day. Do you think that was a better game than the one we just saw, or is it comparable at all?
I was thinking about that this morning as I was watching the final drive over and over again, which reminded me a little bit of Mike Shula. At least halfway, they got halfway down the field and Tiffin
Yeah.
had to finish it, but it seemed like an unlikely thing that rolled out in the only way it could, and so yeah, I was thinking about that myself.
Pardon, I'm not going to use the word I usually use, but just weird things happen in Jordan Hare at the Iron Bowl. But anyway, we could talk the entire 30 minutes about that, and maybe another time we will. But of course, guys, my guest is prize winning and noted author and journalist John Archibald. John, for me at least, for the many years I've been reading him, some may say he's not the voice of reason, but he's my voice of reason. He shakes the feathers that need to be shaken in our state. And I'm so glad that he writes for our state. And that's where I want to start, John. I know you're an Alabamian, thanks high school, Bama, all that good stuff. What is it about our state, the state of Alabama, that gets you writing every day?
Well, that's really interesting. Number one, I mean, people don't believe this because a lot of people tell me to leave all the time, but you've got, I mean, it's rooted in love. I mean, I love this place, and I love, you can go out in normal times and meet people, and as long as you're talking to them, they'll help you in any way they can. It's just that when we get together in mobs, sort of, we do dumb things, which we've done over history, which has allowed a lot of bad things to happen. So I love it, and at the same time, I'm frustrated and indignant by it at times. And if you love something and you don't bother to try to fix the things that are broken, then you don't really love it that much. Is my philosophy.
Well, you just spent a year studying at Harvard, and I've read some of your writings a little bit about that. What did you see? Being certainly many Alabamians have gone to Harvard and studied. Many Southerners have gone to Harvard to study. What did you find uh, while you were up there for almost, I guess it was close to a year, that made you proud to be from our state?
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, we have better food, aside from the lobster. And what I found out most, going up there made me see the world as a lot bigger than I typically see it when I'm, covering the waterworks board or whatever it is. And so, it forced me to do that, but it also forced me to see, I think we've been born and bred over the last, a long time to think that a lot of the problems, originate in the South, and a lot of the problems, racial and otherwise, are are concentrated here. But I think that the thing I found out most is those problems. I mean, we know this from everything that's happened in the last few years, but those Alabama does not have the market on that. The South does not have the market on that, and in some ways we've dealt with it in better ways than some. Not to say that we don't have our moments, but I think that just an appreciation of how very similar so much of the world is to us, not just in America, but across the globe, really. It's both reassuring and disconcerting because, when you think, oh, all the problems are in the South, then you're then you're fooling yourself, and you're letting yourself believe that, oh, there's something better out there. But we all have to fix this together.
From along those lines, John, maybe rightfully so, we've had that reputation in the South and in Alabama for many reasons. But from a PR standpoint, from that standpoint, are there still a lot of pre-held, and I'm going to call them misconceptions, that's the only word I can use here, by people who've never been to Alabama or the South? They just have all these assumptions that life is the way it's always been down here, but we who've lived here don't feel that way. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I guess from your observations and communication with folks from different parts of the world, is that still the misconception is what I call it?
I mean, I think there is certainly that. I was honestly surprised at how I didn't get a lot of that. I didn't get a lot of that. You're wearing shoes, oh my God, kind of thing. Of course, I was wearing toe shoes that my kids won't be seen with me wearing because my knees are bad. But there's a lot of that. But most of the, I mean, honestly, most of the conversations that I had, and I had a lot about these issues, that you were talking about race and about politics and all these things. Most of the conversations were people who were concerned about their own part of the world, whether that was, in America, or whether that was in India, or whether that was in Africa, and a lot of people are dealing with the same sorts of things and the same sorts of fights and the same sort of politics. And all of a sudden the world is huge, but it seems to break down in ways, globally, that are very much like the fights we're having, in our own state, in our own country. So I think that what it taught me is that, we really are a lot more similar than we ever allow ourselves to believe.
And I suspect that the people that you may have spoken with, and this is just pure speculation on my part, maybe don't want to admit that outside of what's going on in between their ears because of our history.
Mm-hmm.
And as I read your writings, and as often as I do, there seems to be a little bit of that kind of woven into, hey, y'all need to pay attention to, we got some good stuff. We're not perfect. No one's perfect. Right. But we got some good stuff going on in our state that we really need to be recognized for.
Right. I mean, we do, and we have to. We ought to do a better job of being, of concentrating on those things sometimes than we do in working to divide us, frankly.
Which but that doesn't sell newspapers. Good
well,
stuff.
It's not. Don't think that that's limited to newspapers. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole. I mean, go on social media. That's the whole politics. That's the division is what drives politics now. And so, it's us and them, and those are the things that seem to ignite the crowds. And it's really frustrating to me as an opinion writer because these days everybody's writing opinion about and not to get too deep in it, but I firmly believe that for a good column to exist, it has to be based on reporting, and it has to be based on real understanding of an issue. And the bad ones, and Lord knows I've written bad ones, don't do that. But there's so many of them in the world today that are just thrown out there as opinions and snapped up and for the purpose of inciting or ranting or whatever it is. And it makes me step back and reflect and say, does that accomplish anything right now? And maybe other mediums, whether they're long form or dramatic or fiction or whatever, might have more ability to persuade now.
And I want to pause that because I do want to come back to that in a few minutes. But John, your book that I read back in the spring, Shaking the Gates of Hell, was such a moving tribute. It was such a moving, I don't know if it's considered a memoir, but two of the words that I've read over and over are fairness and compassion is what's good in the world. And for those of you who haven't read it, first of all, shame on you if you haven't. But second of all, John, how difficult was it to write it? Was it a book that you had been wanting to write for years and finally got to it, or did it take some courage to finally get to putting it on paper?
Um, Honestly, in some ways, if you don't, for people that don't know, it's essentially a story that's told through my dad, really, about silence, particularly white silence in the, from the 60s, from the 50s forward, really. And I consider my dad to be, the greatest human on earth. So it was the hard part was saying, am I holding my dad fully to account for what amounted to his silence and the church's silence? He was a Methodist preacher. And am I being or am I being too hard on him? So I go back and forth with that. But in terms of writing, I've never written anything that came out easier, because once I'd been thinking a lot about silence over the years, and what, and what could have changed in this world, in this part of the world, if people of goodwill, as I like to say, had the courage to speak their mind throughout history, and I didn't know the vehicle that I could use to tell that story until I stumbled across, every sermon my dad ever gave from the pulpit, his pulpits, in a file cabinet in my basement, of all places. Great reporting skills there to find that file cabinet in my basement. But when I found them, I started reading them. It just rolled out of me like it had to come out. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I sure wish it would happen again.
What a gift to find those as you're reading through those, John. Not a lot of people in other lines of work are going to write about all their thoughts and have that. I mean, I know people journal and diary, but for you to find those works of your father, who he then shared with his congregations over the years, that must have been such a gift when you first stumbled upon them, which I guess ultimately made the basis of the book that you wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really was. I mean, and like I said, I know where he stood. I know what he taught me. I mean, he believed in equality. He believed in all these things that form the basis of everything I believe in. And just the first sermon, when I looked at it, was like from April 1963, the month I was born, and it was when, coinciding with the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, when thousands of kids were being arrested in the streets, and it happened to be Children's Sunday at the church, in the Methodist church. And he preached on, all the problems of the world, whether that was in Asia or Africa or Katanga and all these places, everywhere, but, right outside the front, the stained glass windows. And so that's what really said, I was like, what, that's what prompted me to look further. Because if this man who I knew believed strongly in racial equality had trouble talking, found it easier to talk about far away troubles than troubles at home. I mean, that said something to me, and it says something to me, about us now, because we still sometimes have really difficult times seeing what's right in front of us, as opposed to something far away and not something that really affects us.
Maybe it's just easier in the immediate to only look away from, as opposed to what's in front of us. And of course, no person is perfect, but everybody has their strengths and everybody has their weaknesses. And I really think, and it holds true with everybody, with their parents, how they see them, or their siblings, or whoever it is in their life. And it truly, I don't know, there's a word, kismet. I don't know if you know that word. It's a Yiddish word. But for you to have been born in April of '63 and then do the type of work that you do, I just have to think in my mind that just there's something symbolic there to me, John. I know that may sound a little weird or out there, but that's just how I think about it when I'm reading some of your writings.
It's just, for me, as I've gone around and talked about this thing, the one, it's really been interesting, because I've been, in churches and synagogues and every kind of religious establishment talking about this thing, mostly to, white audiences, many of whom are, of my generation or close to it. And there's a real sort of anguish among a lot of people that they don't number one, they don't know the history, and they were here and they don't remember what was going on. And there was just like this erasure of that's past, let's not think about it anymore. And there's a lot of people struggling with that, trying to figure out why they just didn't know. And I think that's part of it. There's a great obliviousness, I think, that a lot of people just don't want to look at. And I think that's a problem, because I think, when we look, particularly in my case, because I really do, I put my dad on this pedestal still. When we look at these people that we admire the most, and we see that, points where they failed or didn't have the courage, that's what allows us to figure out where we're going to be today and tomorrow. And that's the whole point of it all. Yeah. And there's a lot of love in there.
Oh, it just, every page just is filled with that. And as I was reading your book, books that I really try to find books that address the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Birmingham and in Alabama. Of course, I read Chervis Isom's phenomenal book. I read Paul Hemphill's Leaving Birmingham, one of my favorite reads that I've ever read. And there seems to just be a common theme in there, that we recognize what's going on. We're not sure really how to deal with it. We'll do the best that we can given our circumstances, but we should have done more or could have done more. And not to be critical of your father, you've handled all of that from your standpoint. But what I also read of your father's doings is he did so many wonderful things for the congregations and the people who he impacted for over so many years. But I have to pivot for just a second, John. I have to, the one chapter which I'm going to have to ask about is the snakes. And I actually read that story 3 times. And to the extent that you want to share a little bit about it, is there anything that really just still all these many years, I don't know if this is now something that haunts you or is folklore within the family, or maybe your kids don't believe that it occurred.
Oh, they remember. They remember, even though the youngest was 4. It's both folklore and absolute truth. We called it the Moccasin Massacre of 1998. We had this little cabin in North Georgia, and we'd go every year, and it ran right by a creek, and the kids would play in the creek. And when we first got there, I found this, there was a giant water moccasin down below the waterfall, where they always played. And it haunted me for days while we were there that trip. And I ended up killing it and deciding it would be a good idea to skin it with the kids because it was clearly fat and it had just eaten something. And we thought we'd have a little science, outdoors experiment, and I would show how macho I was. And then when I cut it open, I found that it wasn't dinner, but a whole bunch of little baby snakes and placentas inside, and it turned into a bloody Swiss Army knife massacre that I somehow managed to find a way to put in this book, which it became the most controversial chapter. And there are people who, as you say, read it 3 times and think it's the best chapter in the book, and there are people who will not read it and skipped over it and tell me it caused nightmares. But it's absolute truth.
It really is a phenomenal story that I'm sure that no one in the family or those who read the book will ever forget it. But of course, it's not the main point of the book, but it really is a phenomenal family.
When I turned the book in, I had to cut a little bit out. I had to cut 10% of the book. So, and I told my editor, well, let's just cut that, because I kind of forced it in, and she was like, nope, we're not cutting that one. So I guess it had that effect on her.
Guys, of course, I'm talking with author and columnist, journalist John Archibald, and I really am enjoying our conversation. Appreciate his time. John, I want to ask you one last question about the book. Has there been any thought or discussion of any other books that may spurn off of this writing by you?
Yeah, I am. I'm in the middle of kind of developing a proposal for that now, and I can't decide exactly which way I want to go. But I've talked to, honestly, I don't know if this is a book or if it's something else, but I've talked to so many preachers and rabbis and others who of all denominations and faiths about some of their similar experiences. Not just from the South, not just from here, but from all over, and people who came from all different spectrums of reactions, like people who were fully committed to the civil rights movement, and some who paid a heavy price and that sort of thing, and some who went the other way. And I really just think the discussion with those people is so interesting, and how it affected them, and what is the most effective way to use your voice, because that's a big issue as well. You can't argue somebody into seeing your way. You can't get them to see your way by calling them names. So all of those things are playing around in my head, and I'm trying to figure out how exactly to proceed, but I'll be making a proposal on that for sure.
Well, we certainly are looking forward to whatever that turns out to be. John, with all the people who you've interviewed over the years, those who survived the civil rights era in Birmingham, those who survived it, are now getting up in age, many of whom have passed on due to older age or whatever. But there are many incredible storytellers still with us. And I've had the honor of on this show interviewing J. Mason Davis, Judge Houston Brown. I mean, so many of those folks who survived this. They were children or just coming into their own. They were teenagers, maybe even in college. But my question for you, have you had experience, not just interviewing them, which I know you have, but their children or their grandchildren, to see what lessons they've learned or what the impact has been for the younger generations, the children who are coming up now? Because we're now 50, 60 years from then.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific idea. And I have talked to some children of those guys you're talking about, but I think that a wider effort to do that would be fantastic, honestly. For years and years and years, I think Houston Brown's a child of Dynamite Hill, I believe, and I'm just so fascinated with that place where so many just incredible people, successful giants in their fields, came out of that volatile area. And talking to some of their children, is just a terrific idea, and I'd love to do that.
I suspect some of those children and grandchildren have never moved back for many reasons to Birmingham. They've spread their wings elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But I bet there's also a narrow few, I shouldn't say that, I bet there are others who have come back for the specific reason of either joining the family business or just want to be back in close to home, whatever their reasons may be. I just didn't know if you had ventured into there. I'm not looking to assign you a project, of course, but I was just curious your impact. I mean, your thoughts if you've had those conversations yet.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, to some degree, I have, and there were so many people who were forced to leave, and other ways, like Charles Morgan, who's in the book, and who's a great. Had a great impact on me in terms of his words and his actions, and his son has been amazing. And I'm not sure about Fred Shuttlesworth was also forced to leave, and or forced is not necessarily the right word, but at some point you get tired of banging your head against the wall, and for him, I imagine you get tired of having your house bombed and getting beaten in front of schools, and you wonder when is it ever going to be enough. But yeah, talking to the children, and I guess I have more than I think about right now as it's all coming together. But that would make a fantastic project.
The few times I've been to Chuck's Fish pre-pandemic, I always search out people who may have been at that particular restaurant for a long period, and I always want to get a response if they knew the father, Charles Morgan, or of course they know the son. but just phenomenal stories. Are just so many to be told. But we've got just a couple of more minutes, John. But I want to talk about just how dadgum difficult it is in today's world of the internet to be a journalist, to be an author, because everybody has a platform. Everybody has their, what I've heard the term keyboard warriors, and Twitter just seems to be the worst of it. But I don't even know how to ask the question of you, but how do you have a thick skin today if you're a young journalist, a young author trying to make your way in that world?
I mean, I think that's really, really difficult because number one, there's a sort of anti-journalist sentiment right now among half the population that can get pretty heavy, and when people are extremely critical, harsh, insulting, name calling, belittling, that can get to you if you allow it to. And for me, writing opinion, when you're writing opinion, you pretty much better, if you dish it out, you better be able to take it, from my perspective. So I don't worry that much for me because, frankly, if, a lot of people, if people are insulting, I don't really, it's based on, something I wrote that they didn't like. And, I wouldn't really want them to like it if they're that angry about what the things I would say. So that you just got to learn. I very rarely engage in arguments on Twitter because it leads nowhere, and you have to just be able to distance yourself and say, I've had my say. And over time you learn that for me, people will say, you're the greatest thing in the world. And then they'll say, you're the worst thing in the world. And I know that I'm neither one of those things. I know they both have to be wrong, that I'm somewhere in here, and some days I'm over here and some days I'm over here, but mainly I'm just right here in the middle. And so once you realize that what they say doesn't define you at all, and then you can stop worrying about it, and it makes it a lot easier. But that's a tough thing to learn, and it can, on your worst days, it can be a real, especially during COVID and things when we're all just a little bit off in some way, it can weigh heavily on the psyche. But for the most part, it's just so important to do what you do, to speak the truth that you can find and report it well, and to say it as say it as clearly and as succinctly, and as, in my case, as in a way that's entertaining and or spur some emotion.
It seems that 99% of the criticisms are, one, your opinion is wrong, and two, they then immediately get personal about you, not about what you wrote. And I'm not talking about you specifically, but in general, when there's criticisms.
It's that. And recently, it's so much different now because politics has never been as divisive as it is right now, in my experience. And so for the vast majority of my career writing columns, people would say, I would often get, my favorite thing for people to say was, I don't agree with anything you say, but I'd love to read you, which is the ultimate compliment as far as I'm concerned. But these days, you could say the sky is blue and people would make that political somehow. And, it's a lefty blue or whatever. It's the most beautiful, again, it's the most beautiful blue in the world, or it's not, it's raining outside, you idiot. But again, the only thing you can do is, trust the facts that you find, and put it out there, and hope that reasonable people can be reasonable about it. And I think for the most part they are. It's just that vocal bunch on Twitter that you got to watch out for.
Well, I was going to say that seems to be the most divisive of the platforms. I know Facebook can also be that way, but anyway.
And also it's healthy just not to read the comments all the time.
Yep.
Especially after, say, 8 o'clock at night.
Which is worse, reading the comments after the Iron Bowl or after a political article that you've written? It's probably a toss-up right there.
Well, I'm still taking football as entertainment somehow or other. So I can read it with safety because it doesn't make me mad. It just makes me revel in the rivalry.
Yeah, it really is a remarkable rivalry. And John, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. It's when people who are just finding you and I have conversations, it truly is those two words. It's compassion and fairness that come out in your writing, and that's what I so appreciate, and that's what so many people appreciate about your voice. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. That's the nicest thing you could say. I appreciate that very much, and thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And for those of you watching us live or may catch us on the YouTube replay, this is Nomberg Law Live. We do this every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Central, 8 a.m. Pacific. And I have interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And I can think of no finer example than John Archibald and what he does for so many. So thank you, John.
Thank you,
Guys,
Bernard.
you continue to be safe. Please do the right thing for you and your family. And we will catch you again next week. Take care.